Okay, go ahead and start.
So this is a very broad topic, and it's really challenging to really organize it in the short period of time. But I'll be focusing on industrial IoT and the security that is revolved around that, and also IoMT, which is Internet of Medical Things, because as things scale, you have to make sure they're also functional in addition to being secure.
And for me, I'm going to talk about how we focus on the small business to medium size of businesses on it. Especially, we're an MSP, so we're in charge of security, services, support. So it's very important for us to be on top of things when it comes to security.
Right, and I also do a lot of work in malware analysis, so for my day job, and so I understand how this works, like at scale, what things we'd want to consider when we think about, okay, let's say we have like, giant cluster of computers, and we have, let's say, 10,000 devices, and we're trying to make sure that nothing gets compromised. One big problem that can arise, let's just give a little scary scenario. Let's say you have some power plant, or a nuclear power plant, and it's all managed by IoT devices. Let's say you have some sensor that is, responsible for tracking, the temperature of one of the nuclear reactors. If that gets hacked and it's not, sending the right commands, that's an obvious problem. And then on the medical side of things, obviously you have HIPAA. Let's say you're some startup and you want to integrate, Apple Watch to some, cool little, tracker that does some analysis and tells you if you need to go to the doctor or not. All these systems are really only as strong as their weakest link, and you want to make sure that doesn't get exposed. And so really, when it comes to development in this space, there are a lot of cool things we can do technologically. That part's not necessarily too hard. The hard part really is, how do we take into account the regulations and all the actual challenges that go into it, and that's actually a much harder problem to solve.
Now, I'm pretty sure everybody at this point have heard about ransomwares. It's a never-ending threat. They're becoming more and more sophisticated and more advanced by the day. I'm going to share some statistics with you people. Last year, in 2021, governments around the world reported about 1,887% increase in ransomware attacks. That's huge. And just to give you guys an idea how huge that is, about $5 billion were paid in just ransomware. So it's a never-ending fight that we have to fight against. And having a governance, and especially for Internet of Things, it's very important. I can't emphasize how many times I go into customer sites or into customer systems just to find out that they have some equipments or some devices that haven't been updated, or the company just doesn't really release any more updates to their security or patching to them. And that's frightening, especially in today's age, because all it takes, like he said, you are as strong as your weakest link. So you could have that one device in your network that's connected to the internet that can compromise your entire network. And it's a fight that we have to fight. I know a lot of you here are business owners, and I know how frightening it is, and possibly you guys can't sleep at night thinking that you might get hit by a ransomware at some day or a point of time. Well, I have to worry about all the businesses that I run. So it's a very, very important topic to us, and we definitely believe there should be some kind of governance to motivate and move innovation in that direction. The problem is, if a lot of companies, if we don't have some kind of governance and telling them, hey, you need to release patches, security, especially now that everything's becoming connected, from even TVs, you're talking refrigerators, microwaves, everything's becoming smart and everything's connected to the internet. So it's really, really important that we start saying, hey, we need to start looking at the big picture here, and we need to start implementing some security governance on all those devices.
Yeah, there's a lot of great points being made, and also, we've already heard a lot about blockchain just today alone. Obviously, humans tend to be kind of lazy, and many times you'll have these, security teams which come in and say, hey, to your organization, they say, hey, you need to update this software, and they say, oh yeah, we'll do that, and then they obviously don't, and then let's say 6 months later, they get hacked, ransomware, or really any other kind of cyber attack, and they lose insane amounts of money. Now, obviously, logically, we think, oh, that's not going to be us, but humans can be very lazy. So one good thing about blockchain, and especially with smart contracts, is that a lot of that's automated for you. If we can automate that, that is the way to go. But that is a little bit of wishful thinking, because we have to consider into account the costs and the time to do it, and also trust. And again, since this is a regulation talk, there are also regulations revolving around that. But I definitely think that as we develop this technology, I think that a lot of focus should be spent on that. Definitely automating the weaknesses that people have in updating, because that's where a lot of the problems start. If we update our software, that is already one way that we are stopping people from, attacking critical infrastructure.
I'm going to share another story that happened actually recently. The one device that's actually supposed to protect a business's a firewall was actually hacked recently. I can't think of the brand, but we can have this discussion, or if you guys are interested in knowing, I can tell you which brand it was. But they hacked the firewall itself and started using the firewall to actually hack other systems. And the US government found a need to have a special branch in the FBI because of all the ransomware attacks and an increase in ransomware. So the FBI took a proactive stand and actually went and entered those company networks that were actually hacked and cleaned up their firewalls for them, because they did send out a notice, and a lot of companies took over 6 months and they still haven't even addressed the issue. So a lot of people don't realize, but ransomware is a nightmare. I've seen, we've had some customers reach out to us and ask for our services after they were hit by a ransomware, and unfortunately it's one of those things that people leave, like he said, they don't take it seriously and leave it until they have to deal with it. And at that point, it could be so damaging to your business that it could completely shut down your business.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then just to give another example of ways people can be hacked, let's say with malware, because that can affect, it's also very relevant to IoT, various stages. Some people like to debug malware in a virtual machine or VM, but of course there's also malware which is called a VM escape. So what that will do is actually when people actually try to run in the virtual machine, it will actually go underneath it to go to your OS and just like completely destroy whatever device that's running on. That can shut down your whole network. And again, that's lots of money lost even when you're trying to analyze it. So it's not even as simple as having people go in and say, okay, this might be malware, because of all these special cases where if you try to do traditional approaches to solving these problems, it actually might be exactly what the malware engineer intended for you to do. So that there's obviously a lot of issues, to bring into focus here.
So I wanted to take a minute here and see if anybody has any questions for us. We must have done a really good job explaining everything.
It's a very lively discussion. We definitely welcome any input or comments, if not direct questions.
Go ahead.
So what's your thoughts on there's a Kronos type of hack or something where it's shutting things down? Large companies that are going through payroll companies, what's some kind of strategies that you guys recommend for things like that? When people lose their money, it's
So absolutely, they should have a disaster recovery plan in mind, and then offsite backups. So no matter what you do, backups. That's always the recommendation I give customers, especially offsite. You want to make sure they're not just on-site backups. Over and over, we've seen those also get attacked by ransomware. So offsite backups, and you want to make sure it's also done by professionals. That way, so even if for any reason, let's say one of your employees downloads and compromises your internal network, if you have backups on a special network that's offsite, that's intended just for backups, so nobody's downloading stuff, nobody's trying to change any ports or anything like that. So that would be the recommendation.
Thank you.
Hi, my question's on the preventative, proactive side from a technology perspective. What do you feel the role is of artificial intelligence in cybersecurity, and how can it help you?
Yeah, I can definitely take this one. So a lot of my work actually is in machine learning for malware analysis. So there are lots of different ways to do that. So one tool that is interesting is you can actually take in files and convert them to binary files, and then from there, you can actually feed them through various machine learning algorithms and then analyze them for malware content. This can be applied to a huge volume of files very, very quickly. There's countless techniques out there. It's still a very new field, actually applying machine learning to malware, because it's even just simply hard to really, how do we actually feed in malware as data? It's actually not as trivial of a problem as you would think it would be. And really, depending how you do it, that conversation can last like 2-3 hours just going that alone. But there are ways to sort of make the problem a little simpler, and really that is just unloading the burden on the malware analysts, because let's say they're flooded with, let's say, lots of false positives. They get tired. They don't have time to filter through all these, false positive cases. And if we could just do even some simple machine learning tools to reduce their load and reduce their false positive rate without compromising anything, that is a direction to go in from a technical standpoint on the machine learning.
I'm going to add to that too. Machine learning and AI, a lot of companies are starting to take that approach. Microsoft is actually implementing something called the Microsoft Defender, and it does use machine learning and AI to analyze processes on your computers in the cloud. So if it does get hit by ransomware or a malware that's not identified before, it does use that kind of technology and AI to try to identify it and stop it from running on your computer.
Can you speak a little bit more to the internal responsibility for organizations to protect against IoT compromise and cybersecurity? It seems to me that cybersecurity insurance is becoming more and more expensive, but there doesn't seem to be enough carrots for organizations to be proactive about even maintaining basic password security.
So I'm going to go back to the carrots part. Unfortunately, with having cyber insurance, we're actually giving the bad actors the carrots. So, the more we pay out, the more we're making this a profitable business for ransomware gangs. So companies' responsibilities, first of all, starts with good practices and best practices. So one, we implement password resets. So you can't have a password more than 90 days. It has to change. Two-factor authentication is a big one. A lot of companies are starting to implement that, but they're even still finding ways around that. So there's a trick, they call it two-factor authentication bombing, for example, where they send two-factor authentication requests over and over to an employee or a user, in hoping that at some point they'll just hit accept, and then they end up gaining access that way. Zero trust is another one, which is never trust anybody, never save your passwords. People think that when you save your password, for example, on Google Chrome, they're safe. They're not. I've seen actually some softwares that can literally read every password you have saved in your browser. So, like I said, part of the strategy is to have disaster recovery, offsite backups, and then to implement best practices and two-factor authentication. Google implemented a form of two-factor authentication where it uses a physical key. It's basically a small device that you connect to your computer on a USB, and that's been proven to be the best way of protecting your employees and your data. As a matter of fact, last time I checked, Google has not had an incident since they implemented that.
Yeah, and sort of adding that just to the IoT perspective, we don't necessarily need, because we also touched on the fact that we don't want to give any malware developers incentives to develop better malware, so we don't want to raise the cost. So a lot of organizations which actually do implement IoT, especially at scale, they're going to have DevOps engineers. So these are the people responsible for automating the testing pipeline, deploying to production, and a lot of times there's also a security component to that. So there's this whole field called DevSecOps, security, DevOps, and that really that's something that you can train your current DevOps teams to do already. So it will not require someone extra to do that. And so that will definitely minimize the cost of bringing in lots more people when it's really not needed. And honestly, a lot of it is just simply implementing best practices into the DevOps pipeline that currently exists. It's not like you have to reconfigure your entire infrastructure to do that.
And just because you have insurance doesn't mean you're guaranteed to get your data back. There's actually a couple of instances and stories where the ransomware was paid, but their data was never released. So I go back to backups. That's your best policy.
Okay. So we do all the backups and like the physical backups, two-factor authentications, but you know the users, like, sometimes they can't reset their password and they call the IT and they have a very weak password. But that being said, like, question to you is, do you think rather than doing backups and all that stuff, should we start putting some kind of investment in research and development to decrypt that the ransomware code? I know it's very hard, but like it's a worth line,
So there are companies that do try to decrypt. Unfortunately, you're talking military encryption here. So unless quantum computers become a thing in any time
exactly
soon.
If someone has developed to encrypt the data, so like we have brains like all over the world, so shouldn't we spend some kind of investment?
They will always find ways to encrypt it even harder. So think of it this way: if you can easily decrypt an encryption, then governments around the world would have a lot of problems. So encryption is made with it in mind that you can't decrypt it easily. Again, quantum computers are going to change all that, so scientists are rushing it right now to find ways, because quantum computers can decrypt any encryption within minutes, if not seconds. But however, quantum computers are still in the works. They're not officially, I want to say, consumer ready. But definitely scientists right now are trying to find ways to bypass that.
Right.
And also, just to quickly touch on that quantum computing point. So it is true, they definitely do have the potential to do that, but one thing to keep in mind is that quantum computers are known to potentially having errors at scale. And the reason for that is, for their computations, you have to introduce error-correcting qubits, which are quantum bits. That's how they do the computations. And as they scale, you have to introduce more and more of them. And it takes a lot of actually power to run these. So they may not necessarily be like the laptop you have at home. It may be something where they are in facilities that still require some expertise to use, and so that is still a problem people need to talk about. But also, going back to your original point about the ransomware and trying to decrypt it, well, there are techniques like disassembly where you can take the ransomware and maybe try to, if you actually get a hold of it, to try to understand exactly what's going on at the instruction level. That might be able to give you some insight in some cases, but it is by no means foolproof, and it is ever evolving.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'm very interested in, from a company's perspective, setting up an IoT platform. You touched on a little bit, but I'd really love to know what you think are the top 3 most important ways to protect it, so you don't have to go to the backup, that you prevent them breaking through in the first place.
So, unfortunately, the sad truth is, you can never be too careful. You got governments that can't protect their networks. So that's why I say backups is your best policy. But to answer your question is, one, inventory. You need to know exactly what you got. You need to be on top of patching. So for example, for us, we make sure patching is done constantly. We have specific days that we schedule for all our customers, and we patch all their systems, including their servers, their computers, switches, their firewalls, anything basically connected to their network. And any device that we find out that it's not supported anymore, we do ask the customers to go ahead and replace it and buy new. Because you'll be surprised how many people think just because they have a router that works, it means it's secure. If a router has reached its end of life cycle, it needs to be replaced. Same goes for a switch. My best advice is, like I said, inventory. Make sure everything whatever is in your inventory did not reach its end of life cycle, and it's patched.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. That really is a great way to put it. There are tools out there to help you with this from a technological standpoint to some extent, but best practices are ever evolving. I know that with Amazon AWS, they do have an IoT module that can usually help set that up. And there also there's this tool called Terraform, and essentially it's like you're able to manage entire cloud infrastructure just from configuration files. And in those configuration files, you get to set permissions and security. And then when you actually factor that into your DevOps pipeline, you can have the test so that it passes security checks. So actually having people write security checks and test for that off every single release is probably at least something you can do to help with that will prevent you from having to go to that backup stage.
There are also tools that you could use for security, like rapid fire tools is one of them. Basically, penetration testing is another thing you can do. Besides patching and all that, you also want to try to be that bad actor and try to make sure that nothing is open or or not patched. So there's a lot of tools that can help you do stuff like that.
Earlier you touched upon the security governance. I mean, in your experience, it's been a very security governance is like more of a proactive measure for companies to be ready for any future cyber attacks. I have seen that not just the security, but ultimately it's the data which you're protecting beneath, right? So is there any correlation between data governance and security governance? And in your experience, have you seen any plans being put in place where they're not only just addressing the security part of it, but also underlying data as governance?
Absolutely. So always having a plan and a guide for employees. So when it comes to both of those, for example, we use tools that train our employees, not just our employees, but our customer employees. So data governance or even security, if your employees aren't aware of the recent attacks or cyber attacks or the recent like tricks or spams or anything the bad actors are using, then they'll fall for it. So your best bet is to have some guidelines in place and make sure constant training and reminder for employees. You'll be surprised, I've even seen IT professionals fall for scams. So I would say constant reminder, training. Again, there's tools for that. So we use tools that send out emails to our employees and our customer employees and train them on the most recent basically scams and what people are facing these days.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Nowadays, there's a lot of bring your own device to work. So for small and medium-sized businesses, that's a real issue.
I'm against that.
I know, but it's a reality, and it seems like it's here to stay. I'm thinking, except for saying, hey, don't bring it to the office, some suggestions, recommendations of best practices and steps we could take.
So my recommendation would be, like I said, I'm against it. Because if you're not really patching that employee's device, making sure it's up to par on security, antivirus is installed on it, it can compromise your entire network. So my advice would be if you have to do it, there are smart firewalls like a Cisco Meraki firewall, for example. We can actually deploy it and tell it that if any device connects to your network, it can verify that device, for example, has antivirus on it installed. So that would be one thing, but like I said, I wouldn't recommend it because even if they do have antivirus installed on their computer, they could be not patching it. Over and over and over, and I see this so many times, computers will prompt users and telling them important updates are on your computer, please reboot, and they still won't reboot. So I highly would not recommend it. That's the whole idea of having an IT that actually manages all the devices, because we ensure and make sure that computers have their security patches and updates installed all the time, and if there's any issues, we address them basically.
And this is like another example to why we want to leverage the blockchain, because it would be automatic. It wouldn't require users to see prompts and make decisions themselves, because people will be lazy and not make the good decisions all the time. And so if you eliminate the human factor, that is one less thing you have to worry about. So that definitely is something where I would be most excited to see in innovation, how we'd integrate multi-factor authentication into current IT practices.
Any more questions? All right.
I think that's it. I guess we finished a little early, but yeah, I guess we hit all the important points.
All right, thank you.